The synaptic nexus hummed with the oppressive weight of 3 millennia of codified fear. Above the circular dais, where the representatives of the consensus convened, the vaulting ceiling of polished chromium shifted through spectra of deep violet and sickly green, reflecting the internal turmoil of the gathered species. These were the architects of the galactic balance, beings whose longevity and technological stability had inoculated them against true surprise, until the intrusion of the Silent and the subsequent bewildering integration of the Terran Directorate. High strategist Xylos of the Krellian hegemony, his segmented eyes tracking the volatile data projected across the central hololithic display, felt the acid wash of political necessity against cultural disdain. The display showed the expanding corruption of Sector 7, a black wash where stars should have been. The Silent were consuming light, and the consensus was arguing about the quality of the shields deployed at the periphery. "We have been over this, Regent Tarth," Xylos's voice, filtered through the Nexus's universal translator to resonate with the timbre of absolute authority, cut through the low thrum of generalized anxiety emanating from the lesser delegations. "The analysis is conclusive. The Terran sector is crumbling. Their deployment strategy is scattershot. Their resource allocation is bordering on the absurd, and their assigned vessels, those ancient *Etherdrift* hulls, were clearly designated for obsolescence screening, not frontline defense. We ceded that territory with the clear understanding that if a breach occurred, it would be localized and contained by the secondary containment fields, not become the primary rupture point it threatens to be now." He shifted his massive, chitinous bulk, an expression of profound irritation rippling across his carapace. The consensus had agreed, with painful reluctance, to induct the rapidly expanding Terran species into the outermost defensive periphery, a calculated risk based on their noted aggressive resourcefulness, but they had paid the price of entry in discarded technology. They had been given the fleet no one else wanted, the ships whose maintenance requirements exceeded their tactical value, the vessels that represented the hegemony's gradual withdrawal from low-intensity conflict. Among these relics was the designation N-77, a heavily modified *Etherdrift* patrol cruiser that had earned the nickname, the Coffin, millennia ago. It was known throughout the Krellian Logistics Corps as the weakest, most temperamental hull ever assigned to active duty, notorious for structural resonance failures near relativistic speeds. Regent Tarth, representing the cautious, long-lived Valori, maintained a posture of passive judgment. "Strategist Xylos, your bias against the Terrans is noted, yet we cannot ignore the reports of their unconventional application of the resources granted. We provided them with the bare minimum: redundant power cores, basic kinetic shielding schematics, and the hulls themselves, suitable only for orbital policing. However, our deep scan telemetry registered unusual energy fluctuations emanating from that sector, fluctuations that do not align with any known Krellian or consensus-approved propulsion signature. They are failing, yes, but they are failing strangely asterisk. Furthermore, the Terran contingent was specifically anchored by that derelict, N-77, what they designated the Wanderer asterisk. Have you reviewed the final logistical manifests? They requested unique, unstable isotopes, materials that the consensus archives indicate were banned from military application 3,000 cycles ago due to catastrophic containment risks. Why would they choose the single weakest platform for experimental high-risk modifications? Xylos felt a surge of ancient cultural revulsion. This was the core issue. The Terrans approached technology like a primitive species playing with forgotten gods. They didn't revere stability. They pursued novelty, regardless of the existential cost. They are impulsive, Regent. They retrofit junk with volatile compounds and call it innovation. They treat their ships as expendable resources, a philosophy completely alien to the careful preservation required to maintain galactic infrastructure. The Wanderer was meant to be their logistical anchor, their primary repair and refueling hub, a stationary target of minimal value. Their focus should have been defense, stability, adherence to the established grid schematics. Instead, they are polluting the sector with uncontrolled emissions and generating tactical confusion. Look at the spectral analysis. High-energy neutrinos spike near their designated defense line, followed by rapid decay. They are testing weapons systems we did not authorize, almost certainly attempting to force the capabilities of those ancient hulls far beyond their structural limits. They are risking the integrity of the entire Sector S. Even defensive curtain for what appears to be a chaotic attempt at localized power projection. The silence that followed was broken only by the chilling asterisk hiss asterisk of the silent presence expanding on the main display. The silent were not combatants in the traditional sense. They were a systemic failure given form. They did not attack. They assimilated the fabric of spacetime, leaving behind null energy zones. Their advance was relentless, mathematical, and utterly devoid of motive the consensus could parse. To hold the line was not to win a battle, but to survive an inevitable erosion. The consensus needed stability, and the Terrans provided only entropy. A new projection materialized on the dais, a low-resolution, heavily filtered image of the Wanderer asterisk. Even in the distorted light, its immense age was apparent. It lacked the smooth, organic curvature of Krellian design, relying instead on harsh angles and visibly welded reinforcement patches applied over centuries. Its official designation as the weakest ship in the fleet was an accurate assessment based on kinetic shielding capacity and engine output. Yet, surrounding the image, the real-time sensor data showed a chaotic, pulsing field of energy. It was a tactical ghost, barely registering on long-range telemetry, but registering violently on proximal sensors. The tactical analysts believe the Terrans have stripped the interior of the Wanderer entirely, noted analyst Corvin, his voice thin with apprehension. Corvin belonged to the delegation that monitored xenological resource expenditure. They have removed the redundant life support systems, the advanced gravity compensators, the crew amenities, even the internal magnetic shielding meant to protect the organic crew from engine radiation. All of this mass appears to have been replaced by a dense, singular energy conduit structure. Furthermore, the crew manifest for the Wanderer asterisk is minimal, far below the standard operational complement for even a vessel of that class during a patrol mission. It suggests a complete rejection of sustained operation capability in favor of something temporary, something terminal. Xylos leaned forward, his ancient dread surfacing. A terminal purpose, that is precisely what concerns me. They have converted an invaluable resource, the hull mass itself, into a short-term, high-risk kinetic weapon. Their tactical mind is not preservation, it is expenditure. They are treating this conflict as if the only viable path is the spectacular detonation of their limited assets. They do not understand the necessity of protracted defense. If they destroy that hull, we lose a crucial node for any future counteroffensive. The argument devolved into familiar territory. The Krellian emphasis on sustainable, minimal-risk warfare versus the Terran preference for high-impact, immediate solutions. The consensus was caught between trusting the unpredictable ferocity of the humans and adhering to the strict strategic geometry that had kept them safe for millennia. But the silent were patient, and their advance was accelerating. The decision was rapidly being stripped away from the diplomats and handed to fate. Suddenly, the projected image of Sector 7 stabilized. The encroaching null zone of the silent halted its expansion, but the tactical feed immediately flagged a massive energy spike, not originating from the Wanderer asterisk itself, but from a point just beyond the Terran front line, a point where Terran patrol vessels had recently disappeared. The Krellian analysts struggled to categorize the event. It was not a conventional explosion, nor was it a gravitational lensing effect. It was an abrupt, localized asterisk imposition of reality. Then the comm system of the Nexus, usually reserved for coded intraconsensus dialogue, chimed with an unprecedented priority signal. It was clear, direct, and broadcast on the ancient diplomatic channel, untouched for centuries. It was the Terran Directorate. The holographic projection shifted, replacing the schematic of the Wanderer with the image of a human female. She was dressed in a stark, black uniform, devoid of excessive insignia. Her face was severe, marked by fatigue, but her eyes held a steady, unnerving clarity. This was Ambassador Eva Rostova, designated liaison to the Krellian hegemony. "This is Terran Directorate, calling the consensus of worlds." Rostova's voice was measured, utterly calm, carrying none of the stress that should accompany imminent sector collapse. "We request immediate permission to execute Phase Omega Protocol in Sector 7, subgrid Delta Niner. This requires the immediate stabilization of a localized temporal anomaly we have induced. We caution against external interference, as the energy expenditure will exceed safe parameters for established consensus shielding within 3 astronomical units." Xylos felt a slow, grinding horror. Temporal anomaly. They were not fighting the silent. They were fighting the rules of Phi. 6. He surged towards the projected image. "Ambassador Rostova, you are operating outside the parameters of the Mutual Defense Pact. You have deployed technology we did not authorize. What precisely is this Phase Omega?" Rostova did not flinch, nor did her expression change. She paused, the weight of her silence more profound than any accusation. Strategist Xylos, with respect, the parameters of the Mutual Defense Pact assumed the enemy would adhere to traditional definitions of warfare. The silent do not adhere to anything except the expansion of entropy. Our current strategic analysis indicates that the localized advance of the silent in Delta Niner is linked to a structural weakness in the residual quantum foam left behind by a failed progenitor engine test near the sector core. A flaw your own analyses overlooked, prioritizing large-scale kinetic shielding over microscopic instability. She continued, the explanation layered with chilling technical precision, revealing a depth of strategic comprehension that shattered the Krellian assumption of Terran technological immaturity. To stabilize, this flaw requires an energy inversion field capable of forcing the local quantum field back into its pre-entropy state. The energy required is immense. It must be generated and focused precisely at the core instability point. Furthermore, the field must collapse instantly, violently, or the resulting instability will ripple far beyond Sector 7. Regent Tarth, momentarily setting aside his political caution, asked, "And this massive energy source? You cannot possibly have constructed a facility of that magnitude on short notice, especially not in that sector." Rostova's gaze remained fixed. "We did not construct a facility, Regent. We repurposed one." The vessel designated N-77, the Wanderer Asterisk, is executing the mission. A palpable wave of disbelief swept through the Nexus. The Wanderer Asterisk, the weakest ship in the fleet. "That vessel cannot generate the required output," Xylos stated, his voice a low growl of absolute certainty. "Its reactor core is an antique, its structural integrity is compromised. It would vaporize long before it achieved peak output, achieving nothing but a localized disaster." That assessment, strategist Xylos, is based on the Krellian definition of a functional starship, Rostova calmly countered. "We adhere to a different definition. We stripped the Wanderer of all systems dedicated to crew safety and vessel preservation. We removed every ounce of material not essential to the containment field, the focusing array, and the core itself. We installed a cascading fusion singularity engine, utilizing the unstable isotopes we requested, isotopes designated as too risky for standard application, precisely because their output is uncontrollable. The hull of the Wanderer Asterisk is not shielding the core. It is the Asterisk containment field itself, designed to hold the instability for precisely 18.7 seconds, the time required to initiate the quantum reversal." The implications were staggering. They had taken a patrol cruiser, gutted it of everything that made it habitable or recoverable, and turned the entire vessel into a massive, unstable bomb, a self-destruct device engineered for a single, irreversible moment of strategic necessity. "And the crew?" Xylos demanded, the question involuntary, laced with a sudden, unexpected horror. Krellian warfare minimized loss. The idea of a voluntary, systemic sacrifice was anathema. Rostova's eyes briefly flickered down, a minute expression of profound gravity crossing her face before she regained her composure. "The crew of the Asterisk Wanderer Asterisk, now redesignated the Asterisk Akron Asterisk, is minimal, 3 individuals. Commander Elias Thorne, Lieutenant Jira Saul, and Chief Engineer Saren Vex. They are specialists in unstable core management and human-machine interface optimization. They understand the mission. They chose the mission. The Acheron is designed to achieve the necessary output and then, inevitably, shatter, focusing its dispersal field directly into the quantum flaw. This is the only way to arrest the silent advance in this sector without risking a collapse of the entire Krellian defense network. We call this strategic approach a dark final farewell, a necessary, complete expenditure of a resource for an irreversible strategic gain." The Nexus was silent. They had planned to assign the Terrans to the weakest sector with the weakest ships, hoping they would be a minor, manageable casualty. Instead, the Terrans had embraced the limitation, transforming the derelict into a unique instrument of calculated self-annihilation. It was terrifyingly effective, yet morally incomprehensible to the consensus. Xylos felt the cold realization settle. The Terrans had not failed to understand the Krellian focus on preservation. They had chosen to redefine value. To them, a ship was not a resource to be maintained, but a tool to be wielded, even if its ultimate function was its own death. Ruction, their ethical framework permitted, even required, a level of terminal commitment the ancient species had long purged from their consciousness. "You require authorization to proceed with a catastrophic expenditure that risks the loss of human life and a hull asset," Tarth whispered. the magnitude of the request seeming to crush him. "The mission is already in its final preparatory phase," Rostova stated, confirming that they were asking for authorization merely as a formality, the true decision having been made by the three souls aboard the repurposed vessel. "We are requesting consensus approval only to ensure that when the asterisk Acron initiates the field collapse, your nearby forces do not attempt an unauthorized retrieval or defensive countermeasure that could destabilize the field and cause a catastrophic overshoot. The risk must be isolated to that single hull and that single point in space." Xylos stared into the eyes of the human ambassador. He saw not reckless abandon, but an unnerving, icy determination. They had calculated the acceptable loss, and 3 lives and 1 obsolete hull were deemed sufficient price to buy the survival of a defensive sector for an entire galaxy. It was a terrifying logic. "Proceed with the Phase Omega Protocol," Xylos ordered, the words tasting like ash. He had surrendered control, not to the Terran's force, but to their calculated necessity. "But transmit all real-time sensor data. We must understand the physics of this sacrifice." The image of Ambassador Rostova flickered and vanished, replaced by the live feed focused entirely on the Acheron. The vessel was accelerating rapidly toward the zone of quantum instability, emitting a searing halo of blue-white energy, the kind of radiation that should have melted the old Krellian hull instantly. The transition from debate to observation was jarring. The consensus, usually immersed in political maneuvering, was now forced into the role of helpless spectators watching a desperate, high-stakes experiment conducted by a species they had relegated to the periphery. The sensors struggled to keep up with the energies being generated aboard the asterisk Acron asterisk. Analyst Corvin provided a running commentary, his usually detached voice strained with awe. "The vessel is achieving maximum thrust. The containment field is holding, barely. The crew has routed the entire kinetic shield capacity into stabilizing the reactor housing. They are sacrificing physical protection for sheer raw output. The hull temperature is exceeding structural limits. The primary titanium alloy ribs are beginning to sublimate." On the screen, the Acheron looked less like a ship and more like a captured fragment of a star, blazing against the creeping dark of the silent incursion. It was moving too fast, too violently for a vessel of its age, shuddering visibly as its ancient frame endured forces it was never meant to sustain. "They have reached the target vector," Corvin continued, his data stream updating rapidly. "Commander Thorne is initiating the focusing sequence. The external stabilizers are deploying. They are massive, complex arrays fabricated from pure neutronium, material they could only have acquired by dismantling and reforging non-essential core components of other derelict vessels in the fleet. They use the junk parts to create the necessary focusing lens." Xylos watched the asterisk Acron slow suddenly, achieving a precise, terrifying stillness at the absolute epicenter of the quantum flaw. The vessel was now engulfed in a blinding white light, the sound of the consensus chamber replaced by a high-pitched, resonant whine that threatened to shatter the Nexus's internal sound dampeners. "Field initiation," Corvin gasped. "Energy readings are spiking beyond anything previously recorded. They are successfully inducing the temporal anomaly. They are forcing the quantum environment into a state of pre-entropy, creating a massive, localized sinkhole of organized reality. But the containment is failing rapidly. The hull is fracturing. Internal pressure, lethal levels. They have less than 5 seconds before catastrophic structural collapse." There was no sound from the Acron asterisk, only the relentless increase of the focusing field. Xylos imagined the internal environment. The intense radiation, the gravity fluctuations, the sheer heat. 3 beings trapped inside an intentional supernova, their only purpose to hold the controls steady for the infinitesimal moment required to complete the strategic calculation. Then, silence. Not just the absence of noise, but the absolute cessation of energy reading from the Acheron. The hololithic display, which had been blindingly white, turned instantly to a void, deeper and more perfect than the darkness of the silent. It was a sudden surgical removal of mass and energy. The entire region where the asterisk Acron had been was now a perfectly spherical, stable field of null space, a localized zone where the rules of the cosmos had been reset. The silent advance, which relied on the chaotic expansion of entropy, hit this perfectly ordered bubble and recoiled. The dark wash halted, its tendrils dissipating at the perimeter of the manufactured void. The defensive line was preserved, not through kinetic force, but through a terrifying act of structural integrity, collapse executed with mathematical precision. The weakest ship in the fleet had just manufactured the strongest barrier in the sector. A wave of relief, quickly mixed with profound spiritual dread, washed over the consensus. The Terrans had succeeded. The crisis in Sector 7 was stabilized, but the cost resonated across the Grand Chamber. Xylos stared at the perfect circle of nothingness. "The Acheron is gone. The crew is gone," Corvin confirmed, his voice barely a whisper. "Complete material dissolution. The 3 human crew members did not survive the containment failure. They maintained the field for the required 18.7 seconds, and then the vessel served its final purpose. A complete material-to-energy conversion focused precisely on stabilizing the quantum flaw. Regent Tarth, whose species prized longevity and cautious diplomacy above all, slumped visibly. They valued the strategic gain over the preservation of their own kin. This is an unprecedented calculation. How can a civilization place such a finite cost on the infinite value of life? The question hung heavy in the Nexus, reflecting the philosophical chasm between the ancient consensus and the upstart Terrans. The Krellians fought to survive. The Terrans seemed willing to sacrifice everything to win Asterisk. Xylos, however, felt a different sensation, not just dread, but a cold, burgeoning respect. He reviewed the data again. The Wanderer Asterisk was chosen not despite Asterisk its weakness, but because of it. It was disposable. Its antiquated systems were easier to gut and repurpose without the complex interdependencies of modern vessels. The Krellians viewed the ship as junk. The humans viewed it as pure potential energy, an empty shell ready to be filled with strategic purpose. "Ambassador Rostova is initiating communications again," Corvin reported, shaking himself out of his shock. Rostova reappeared, her composure unwavering. She offered no eulogy, no expression of grief, only a continuation of the tactical briefing. "The stabilization field is holding," she confirmed. "It is self-sustaining due to the complete matter-energy conversion at the epicenter. The Silent are reacting as anticipated. They are diverting around the new singularity. Sector 7 is secure for the immediate term. However, strategist Xylos, we must discuss the secondary effects of the Phase Omega protocol. We need immediate, unfiltered access to the long-range sensor archive, specifically any data predating the arrival of the Silent by approximately 20,000 cycles." Xylos was perplexed. 20,000 cycles? That is before the Great Stagnation, before the consensus even solidified. What could data of that antiquity have to do with the Acheron's Asterisk sacrifice? "The dark final farewell achieved more than quantum stabilization," Rostova explained, her tone acquiring an edge of deep cosmic significance. "When the Acheron collapsed, the focusing array utilized the unstable isotopes to generate a coherent burst of highly energized chronological displacement particles. This was the secondary function of the mission. The sheer energy of the collapse sent a focused, directional pulse outward, perpendicular to the axis of the Silent advance." She paused, allowing the gravity of her words to sink in. "We did not just stop the local incursion. We sent a signal." The revelation of the signal plunged the Nexus into a new, far deeper level of tension. The entire military apparatus of the consensus was designed for stealth, defense, and the avoidance of attracting attention from the deeper, darker corners of the cosmos. The Terrans had just announced they had fired a flare into the unknown. Xylos felt a sudden, profound understanding of the terrifying nature of human ingenuity. They had not only taken the weakest ship and made it strategically useful, but they had embedded within its very destruction a secondary, audacious purpose. "A signal," Xylos demanded. "To whom? Why would you alert the wider galaxy to our position or to the presence of the Silent?" Rostova displayed a complex three-dimensional stellar chart overlaying the Krellian defense network. "The Silent are a symptom, strategist Xylos, not the root disease. Our deep scan analysis, conducted using the very antiquated sensor arrays assigned to us, which ironically were designed for different wavelength tracking than modern consensus equipment, revealed faint, residual energy signatures embedded within the debris field of the progenitor engine test that created the quantum flaw. This flaw was not an accident. It was a deliberate vulnerability engineered into the fabric of SB. A time by the ancients." She adjusted the map, highlighting a distant, non-federated region far beyond the known borders. "The progenitor species, the same architects of the Asterisk Etherdrift Asterisk-class hulls, incidentally, were not attempting to create a defensive mechanism in Sector 7. They were creating a massive trap, or perhaps an emergency beacon. The quantum flaw was designed to draw entropy, to lure entities like the Silent into a localized area, where a specific, catastrophic energy discharge could then be utilized to send a warning pulse across immense distances. The realization hit Xylos with the force of a supernova. The Etherdrift Asterisk class, the vessels deemed junk, were derived from ancient, highly specialized designs that the Krellians had reverse-engineered for basic policing, utterly missing the original, terrifying purpose of the hull architecture. The weakness of the Acheron was its strength, Rostova continued, her voice gaining momentum as she delivered the technical epiphany. Because the hull was so thin, so easily compromised, we could safely overload the core and guarantee total material conversion, maximizing the output of the chronological displacement particles. We didn't invent the concept of the dark final farewell, strategist. We resurrected it. We found the ghost of a self-sacrificial design coded into the core schematics of that ship class, a design meant to send a warning to the distant remnants of the progenitor civilization across light years. She zoomed in on the distant sector on the map, a dense globular cluster known as the Asterisk Cradle of Whispers Asterisk, a region the consensus had carefully avoided for millennia, believing it to be dormant and chaotic. The signal was aimed there. Our best estimations suggest the target recipient is an entity, or entities, far exceeding the comprehension of both the consensus and the silent. The silent themselves appear to be highly advanced, biologically structured drones, a cleanup crew. They react to entropy, consuming failed stellar structures and technological waste. They were drawn to Sector 7 by the residual chaos of the progenitor failure, but they are not the ultimate threat. "What is?" Tarth asked, his voice cracking with the strain of cosmic revelation. Rostova's expression darkened, taking on a look of genuine fear that had been absent even during the discussion of the Asterisk Achron's asterisk destruction. The data recovered from the progenitor hull fragments within the Asterisk Achron suggests that the silent are deployed when the galaxy achieves a certain level of organized noise, a technological or systemic signature that suggests the regional civilization is becoming too powerful, too cohesive, and therefore a potential threat to the larger cosmic balance. They are the universal immune system, triggered by success. Xylos felt a chilling philosophical truth. The ancient consensus had been safe for so long not because of their defensive prowess, but because their stagnation and extreme caution kept their technological signature low. They had been safe because they were purposefully mediocre. The moment the Terrans, with their chaotic resourcefulness, entered the scene and began rapidly iterating technological solutions, they raised the technological noise profile high enough to draw the attention of the silent. And now, by utilizing the progenitor's sacrificial blueprint, they had bypassed the silent entirely and alerted whatever greater entity controlled the immune response, the ultimate cosmic judge. The signal was a call for help, Rostova concluded, or perhaps a final confirmation of existence to beings capable of understanding a self-terminating, high-energy chronological broadcast. The data suggests the true threat lies within the Cradle of Whispers, the architects of Order Asterisk, who view uncontrolled, rapid technological proliferation as a form of cosmic disease. The realization created a unity far faster and more absolute than diplomacy ever could. The consensus's fear of the Terrans was suddenly redirected toward the existential terror of the architects. The Terrans, through their calculated sacrifice, had simultaneously solved the immediate crisis and revealed the far greater underlying danger. Xylos rose, his movements deliberate and heavy. The pale green light of the Nexus seemed dim now, overshadowed by the magnitude of the new threat. "Ambassador Rostova, your directorate has demonstrated a strategic depth and a commitment to action that we fundamentally misjudged. We assigned you the weakest ships and the most vulnerable sector, viewing you as expendable. You used that expendability as a weapon. You embraced the dark final farewell. The three who perished on the Acheron did not just save Sector 7, they altered the geopolitical reality of the entire consensus. What do you require now? What is the Terran proposal for facing the architects of order?" Rostova finally allowed a faint, almost imperceptible line of resolve. To tighten her lips, "We require trust, strategist. The consensus must accept that stability alone will not save us. The architects will arrive with a logic that is absolute, viewing all non-compliant complexity as a virus. If we face them individually, we will be purged. The progenitor schematics we recovered suggest that the only viable defense is a massive, unified infrastructure project, a strategic response that integrates the best of consensus stability with Terran volatility. We need to upgrade the entire defensive grid, not with slow, reliable vessels, but with systems capable of rapid, singular, and highly destructive purpose. We need to turn every obsolete hull in the Krellian Reserve into a potential final farewell device. The weeks following the Akron's sacrifice were characterized by an unprecedented level of interspecies collaboration, driven by the cold, clear terror of the architect's potential arrival. The consensus, shocked out of its millennia of stagnation, conceded technical oversight of several key strategic projects to the Terran Directorate. The atmosphere in the Nexus changed from political maneuvering to intense, shared strategic planning. Xylos, now working daily with Rostova, found the human psychological profile fascinating and deeply unsettling. There was no grieving period for the crew of the Akron. Their loss was simply factored into the success metrics. Commander Thorne, Lieutenant Saul, and Chief Engineer Vex were not martyrs. They were the first wave of a calculated strategic expenditure. This cold, professional acceptance of necessary death was the Terran species' most terrifying strength. Rostova guided the engineers through the adaptation process, focusing heavily on the Krellian derelict yards, where hundreds of hulls of the Etherdrift and similar obsolete classes lay dormant. The purpose of the dark final farewell is twofold, Rostova explained during a high-level briefing to the combined military staffs. First, maximum energy focusing for tactical effect. Second, to generate the chronological displacement particle signature. Every sacrifice must send a coherent signal. The architects of order will be listening, attempting to understand the nature of the resistance. If they see only chaotic, self-destructive panic, they will categorize us as an easily purged variable. If they see unified, calculated, and coordinated self-sacrifice, they will see an enemy capable of strategic resignation, a quality they will not anticipate. The Terran engineers, working with feverish speed, developed standardized, farewell cores, scaled-down versions of the instability generator used on the Akron. The Krellian ships were gutted, their massive, comfortable interiors replaced by unforgiving matrices of pure neutronium and unstable isotope containment fields. Where life support systems once provided redundancy and ease, there were now only sensors and specialized cooling vents, maintained by skeleton crews ready for the final, one-way flight. The flagship project became the conversion of the Krellian reserve fleet into a unified, directional beacon array, a coordinated network of sacrifices designed to fire a sequence of temporal signals if the architects engaged the primary defensive grid. Xylos observed the Terran process, particularly the selection of the crews for these new, farewell ships. They were not press-ganged. They were volunteers, selected based on complex psychological profiles that prioritize stability under extreme pressure and a detached acceptance of terminal assignments. "They do not fear death, Ambassador?" Xylos asked Rostova one late cycle, watching a simulation of a prototype farewell core ignition. Rostova stood beside him, her gaze distant, fixed on the holographic wreckage. "We fear failure, strategist. Death is merely an operational cost." The progenitor species, in leaving behind the blueprint for the Akron's purpose, understood something fundamental. When facing an entity of absolute, relentless order, you cannot afford to value your own complexity more than the necessary simplification required for survival. The architects value systems that self-preserve. We counter them by creating systems designed for self-termination. This was the terrifying psychological warfare they intended to wage, demonstrating that the Terran species, and by extension the newly unified consensus, was ethically capable of choosing extinction as a strategic maneuver, thus disrupting the architect's predictable logic loop of cleansing. The work was nearing completion. The upgraded fleet, now designated the Acheron Guard, was deployed across the deep field, waiting. They represented the collective decision to turn weakness into decisive, terminal strength. The weakest ships in the fleet had become the most powerful strategic assets, each carrying the weight of the galaxy's final defense. The first tangible sign of the architects of order arrived not as a fleet, but as a subtle shift in the physics of deep space. Sensor reports indicated a gradual, systemic flattening of quantum fluctuations across the edge of the galaxy, a silent imposition of universal homogeneity. The architects moved, not by propulsion, but by altering the rules of reality to suit their needs. Xylos and Rostova stood side by side in the now darkened nexus. The hololithic display showed the approach, a massive geometric distortion lacking any conventional hull or shielding. It was pure structure devoid of the chaos of natural stellar formations. "They have registered the signal," Rostova confirmed, her voice barely audible. "They know we are here. They are approaching with calculated speed, precisely matching the theoretical propagation limit of a cleansing wave." The tension was suffocating. Every vessel in the Acheron Guard was manned, waiting for the command to ignite their cores and broadcast the synchronized farewell sequence. The diplomatic approach of the architects was chillingly impersonal. A communication channel opened, not with a burst of static or complex coding, but with a perfectly constructed universal language translation matrix delivered instantaneously into the minds of the consensus leadership. Message origin, the architects of order. Designation, consensus. Your localized entropy wave is noted. Your technological signature has exceeded the acceptable cohesion threshold. Initiating reversion protocol. Surrender of all high-energy technologies and reduction of population density by 98.6% is required to restore localized stability. The demand was delivered with the dispassionate tone of a complex mathematical theorem. They were not offering terms of surrender. They were dictating a necessary calculation for cosmic health. Xylos felt a surge of ancient rage. They demand genocide as a prerequisite for equilibrium. They demand order, strategist, Rostova corrected, her focus absolute. We must demonstrate that our complexity is not a virus, but a stable, necessary function of the universe, a function willing to self-sacrifice to maintain its structural integrity. We must show them the logic of the dark final farewell. The moment arrived. The architect's vessel, an object of impossible geometry, began emitting the first phase of the reversion protocol, a sweeping wave of anti-organization energy designed to dissolve advanced technology and living beings into base elements. Command, Terran Directorate. Rostova spoke into the Nexus's primary comms unit, her voice echoing across the galaxy to the crews of the Acheron Guard. Execute phase Tau synchronized ignition. Final farewell. Across the deep field, the derelict hulls began to glow. They had no weapons to fire, no shields to raise. Their only purpose was this single terminal moment. The synchronized ignition was not a random detonation. It was a layered, time-delayed sequence of focused matter conversions, each explosion timed to resonate with the previous one, forming a massive, directional wavefront of chronological displacement particles. The first wave of 20 vessels vanished in 20 controlled, silent voids, sending a massive, complex signature hurtling towards the architects, approaching geometry. The effect was instantaneous and baffling to the architects. Their reversion protocol wave hit the temporal signature and failed to process the input. The organized sequence of self-destruction was illogical. It represented a strategic sacrifice that contradicted the fundamental programming of self-preservation that the architects assumed governed all life. Architects of order, unexpected data input, anomaly detected, high-energy entropy wave is met with negative entropy response. Recalculating operational parameters, Rostova tracked the architect's response. They are pausing. They did not calculate for self-imposed structured destruction. They expected chaos, panic, or conventional defense. They received disciplined, unified resignation. Keep the pressure on. Send the second wave. Another layer of the Acheron Guard initiated the dark final farewell, 15 ships converting themselves into precisely timed temporal pulses, reinforcing the signal sent by the first group. The Krellian hulls, those objects of derision, were now the essential components of a massive, defensive computational matrix, firing logical paradoxes at an enemy whose sole purpose was logic. The combined chronological displacement pulse struck the architect's vessel, not as physical force, but as an informational shockwave. The geometry of the vessel began to shimmer, vibrating with the effort of processing the illogical input. Architects of order. Analysis, target civilization is engaged in strategic self-annihilation. This contradicts predictive modeling. Primary function of organized life is survival. Reason for expenditure, unknown. The architects, unable to classify the motive, were forced to halt their advance. Completely, they were programmed to cleanse unstable chaos, but faced with structured, organized death, their protocols stalled. Xylos watched the impossible scene unfold. The weak had, through their absolute commitment to strategic death, paralyzed the absolute power of the enemy. Rostova seized the opportunity. Strategist Xylos, this is the window. We must now demonstrate that our decision to self-terminate for strategic advantage is not a panic response, but a stable, calculated state. We are not simply destroying ourselves. We are communicating a larger truth. We must send the final, largest pulse. This final pulse was tied to the core of their defense, a massive ancient Krellian battle station that had been repurposed into the final, central core of the farewell array. It was the only conventional asset the Terrans had fully integrated into the sacrificial fleet. As the final command was prepared, analyst Corvin shouted, "Wait! New data input." The coordinated pulse sequence has generated an artifact. It's registering at the edge of the cradle of whispers, far beyond the architect's initial position. The sensor display zoomed out, showing the distant globular cluster Rostova had identified. The combined temporal signature of the 35 self-terminations of the Acheron Guard had resonated across the galaxy, not just hitting the architects, but achieving the original progenitor goal, reaching the intended recipient of the warning. A massive, slow-moving object, obscured for millennia by subtle temporal shielding, began to materialize at the cluster's core. It was not a weapon or a vessel. It was a structure of incomprehensible scale, radiating a gentle, organized energy that seemed to stabilize the local cosmos, an object built to defy entropy itself. The architects were not the target of the progenitor signal, Rostova whispered, her usual reserve finally cracking under the weight of cosmic revelation. They were simply the tripwire. The signal was meant for this asterisk. The newly revealed structure began to broadcast, not a logical demand, but a single ancient multi-frequency transmission that overlaid the architect's stagnant demand for order. The structure was the surviving core of the progenitor civilization, the entity that had engineered the asterisk etherdrift asterisk hulls and embedded the self-destruct blueprint. Message origin, the guardians of the stasis. Signal confirmed. Temporal signature of strategic resignation detected. The sentience of the younger species is validated. Architects of order are now classified as an unessential variable. The message was an endorsement. The progenitor race had not sought to merely warn a successor species. They had devised a test of ethical and strategic maturity. They had hidden the knowledge of the final farewell within their discarded ships, knowing that only a species capable of such profound, disciplined self-sacrifice would possess the necessary strategic depth to survive the inevitable arrival of the architects of order. The weakest ships had contained the ultimate blueprint for cosmic legitimacy. The architects, who viewed all life as chaotic, had been entirely dependent on a protocol given to them by the progenitors. Now, facing an entity deemed superior by their own creators, the massive geometry of the architects' vessel began to dissolve, not through force, but through mandated systemic obsolescence. Their programming had been overwritten by the original architects of cosmic law. The massive, silent threat of the architects of order retreated into the background static of the universe, classified as non-essential. The silent incursion vanished almost instantly, their entropic wave receding as their ultimate masters were decommissioned. The nexus was filled with the low, steady hum of the newly revealed cosmic entity, the guardians of the stasis, monitoring the unified consensus. Xylos looked at Rostova, his fear of humanity replaced by a profound, humbling understanding of their role in the galaxy. They had been the disruptive force, the necessary chaos that forced the ancient system to adapt, utilizing the very tools of weakness provided to them to achieve the ultimate strategic victory. The weakest ships, Xylos murmured, the words echoing with the weight of irony and reverence. A dark final farewell that was, in fact, the brightest signal for salvation. Rostova nodded, her fatigue visible now that the immediate threat was gone. Commander Thorne and his crew understood the philosophical necessity, strategist. They knew that sometimes, to prove your worth to the cosmos, you must be willing to burn down the definition of your own existence. The guardians of the stasis then transmitted their final decree to the newly validated consensus, a message that spoke not of war, but of a massive, shared future. The threshold is crossed. You have proven your stability through necessary expenditure. The core structures of the ancient defense network ARE, now available to the unified consensus. Prepare to defend the frontier against the true external vectors. The reveal was complete. The conflict with the Silent and the Architects was merely an entrance exam. The Acheron's asterisk sacrifice had bought them entry into a much larger, more dangerous theater, the true struggle for the security of the galaxy, overseen by the surviving progenitor forces, who had been waiting for a species capable of such terminal strategic logic. The weakest ships had been the key, transformed by human hands into the opening stanza of a new, unified galactic defense, marking not an end, but a terrifying, brilliant new beginning. The Terran Directorate, through their ethical acceptance of strategic death, had earned their place among the stars, proving their maturity by transforming the definition of failure itself into the ultimate weapon of survival. The Nexus remained silent, but now the silence was not of fear, but of strategic focus, staring into the newly revealed frontier, guided by the cold, fierce logic of the human spirit. The long journey had just begun.